We're recording this and going to post it online. That way, if the time is not convenient, you could still watch it. I'm grateful to all of you for sharing my love for the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon is the greatest witness that I know of the divinity of Jesus Christ. It teaches the atonement of Jesus Christ with a depth and a clarity unmatched anywhere in the world. It is key evidence of the prophetic calling of Joseph Smith. And it is filled with this doctrine of Christ. It's also filled with the Spirit of the Lord. It fills you and me with a power to be better than we would without it. In other words, as Nephi puts it, it persuades us to do good. It is a fountain of personal revelation. And it is exhibit A, to use the lawyer's phrase, of the truthfulness of the restoration and the divine sonship of Jesus Christ. It teaches the atonement beautifully. There's nothing quite like it when it comes to helping us understand the atonement. And so it's our privilege this year to study the message in the Book of Mormon. But today we want to talk about the message of the Book of Mormon, because that is also very inspirational. In other words, how we got the Book of Mormon, where it came from, and the care and attention that God gave and spent and devoted to giving us what we have, what we call the Book of Mormon. Who were the major players, and what can we learn from the translation process? All of that is what we're going to talk about today. Now, I prepared a PowerPoint, and it was more than 100 slides. You can't do an hour-long presentation with 100 slides. We spend, what, 20 seconds on each slide? Something like that. What I'm going to do tonight is just tell the story. And we've already, if you go on the chat, you'll see that there is a link to the PowerPoint. You can have it in a PDF, but you can also get the original. And you'll see scriptural references on almost every slide. Not so much to verify that I got the story right, but just so that if you want to do any additional study, you'll have those resources available to you. So
the chat is not available just yet, but they're working on getting it available.
I got you. So the chat's not, we tried to post the link. There'll be a link on there before this is over that basically gives you a copy of the PowerPoint, including a whole bunch of slides that are hidden because we just don't have time to go over them. So let me share screen. And here we go. What I hope to accomplish today is, how did we get the Book of Mormon? What's the story about how, and then we're going to go from Father Lehi to Joseph Smith. And then what do we mean when we say the Book of Mormon was written for our day? Because isn't all scripture intended for our profit and learning? Isn't that what we learn in the New Testament? And so in what way is the Book of Mormon written for us in a different way than maybe other scriptures are? And to what extent did the creators of the Book of Mormon understand the significance of what they were doing and their project's role in God's plan for the wrapping up scenes of the world and for the gathering of Israel and for the fulfillment of the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? To what extent did the people who created the Book of Mormon understand that? And then, and what can we learn from the translation process? Because for me, answers to these questions are extremely inspirational, and they motivate me to take the book a lot more seriously. So let's get to it. What can we learn about how we got the Book of Mormon? Well, let's start with Lehi. Lehi left Jerusalem. You all know that. He left because he got a vision that said that Babylon's going to attack and your family is going to be destroyed if you don't leave. And so they left. And this is an artist's depiction of, Nephi and Lehi leaving Jerusalem, apparently at night, according to this artist. Now, they spent 8 years in the wilderness before they got to Bountiful. We don't know how long they were in Bountiful. The record only tells us that they were in Bountiful and they rested. And then the Lord told Nephi to get up into the mountain. He had to get tools. He began to build. His brothers wouldn't help. They got them turned around with some divine help. Then they had to finish the ship. They had to pack it. Then they had to sail to the promised land. We don't know how long that took, but it was 8 years from the time they left Jerusalem to the time they got to Bountiful. Now, what we don't talk about very much is that during that time, during that journey, Lehi created a record. We don't have a copy of that record. At least we don't have a full copy of it. We only have a short abridgment of it. But we're not speculating about whether he had a record. Lucy Mack Smith, Joseph's mother, references Lehi's record in her history, but we don't have to rely on that. The Book of Mormon itself talks about Lehi's record at least 3 times, and Nephi describes it in some detail. So he created a record, and so that was happening, and we know something about what was on it. We know that it has a more detailed version of his tree of life vision. We know that it has a much more detailed version of his prophecies and his visions. We know that it has a more extensive discussions about the talks and the conversations that he had with his children, especially Laman and Lemuel. And we know that because Nephi tells us all that in 1 Nephi chapter 1, chapter 9, and chapter 19, and so forth. So Lehi creates a record. All right. Now, Now, whenever they finally get to the promised land, Nephi comments on the abundant natural resources that he has there in the promised land. It's like nothing he'd ever seen before. They had amazing fertile soil. They had all kinds of wild animals. They had all kinds of ore, including gold and silver. And the very next verse, the Lord commands Nephi to make a record. Now, to be honest, I used to be a little bit, I don't want to say uncomfortable, but a little bit nervous about sharing some of my skeptical friends that the plates were made out of gold. It just sounded a little bit fantastic. Now that I'm older, I realize that that was the perfect material that you could have used. I mean, if they would have used iron, for example, it would have been very difficult to engrave on iron, and it would have rusted and corroded, in one lifetime. But if you take a clump of gold and put it in the Amazon jungle, 1,000 years later, it will look essentially the same. It doesn't corrode, it doesn't rust, it's soft, you can carve on it. It's just about the perfect material that you could have used. And Nephi created what we now call the large plates. Nephi called them the plates of Nephi, or he often called them these things. In fact, many of the prophets in the Book of Mormon refer to the record as these things. The most prominent one, of course, is Moroni. When you receive these things, if it be wisdom in God that you read them, when he gives his promise. But Mosiah calls them these things, Nephi calls them these things, Mormon calls them these things. When you read these things in the Book of Mormon, it's usually talking about the record, the plates of Nephi in particular. We call them the large plates. Now, what's on the large plates? Well, the first thing that Nephi did, and this is according to his record, is that he preserved his father's record on the large plates. He basically recopied whatever, we don't know what Lehi wrote his record on. Presumably it was on something perishable because Nephi felt the need to recopy it onto the large plates. So the large plates contained all of Lehi's record. And then Nephi included some of his own stuff. The record of his history, his preachings, his prophesyings, and so forth. Now we're comfortable and we're fond of saying that the large plates contained the historical record, the contentions, the wars, the things that kings would be interested in, and the small plates contained the record of the ministry and the spiritual things. And that's because that's how Nephi describes it. But the truth is, the large plates contained all of Lehi's record, which was very spiritual, his visions, his preaching, and so forth. And it contained a number of spiritual matters. And certainly after King Benjamin till the end, everything on the large, everything of spiritual import was on the large plates. King Benjamin's speech was on the large plates. Abinadi was on the large plates. Jesus's ministry was recorded on the large plates. And so the large plates was a lot more than genealogy and wars. Basically, everything of military, political, or spiritual import was put on the large plates. So that's what's on the large plates. Now, 30 years after Lehi left Jerusalem, don't know exactly how long after they got to the promised land. If you were to speculate that it took them 2 years to build the ship and get there, it'd be 20 years after they got to the promised land. But in any event, 30 years after they got to the promised land, Nephi was commanded to make a second record, a set of small plates. And I find it very significant that Nephi at the time did not know why he was doing it. He says, "Wherefore the Lord commanded me to make these plates," meaning the small plates, "for a wise purpose in him, which purpose I know not." I don't know why I'm doing this. I've already written it all on the large plates. But the Lord knows all things from the beginning. Wherefore he prepareth a way for me to accomplish all of his works. And so I find it very significant that Nephi had the faith to act on that prompting and to try to create a different record. Now, of course, Nephi was a different person by the time he created this record. I mean, by the time Nephi is 30 years after leaving Jerusalem, he's had a chance to ponder, he's had introspection, and he's had a chance to see what has happened to his family in perspective. His brothers have already separated from him. His father has passed away, and he's built a temple. And during that time period, he's had a chance to think about the magnitude of what's happening. But he still doesn't understand really the significance of what role the small plates will play in all of this. However, I will tell you that by the end of his engraving on the small plates, he clearly understood who his audience was. If you read 2 Nephi 25 through 32, he is talking to us. He is talking to the folks in the latter days who are going to read this record. He's talking about the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. He's talking about the doctrine of Christ. He's talking about Judgment Day. He's talking to Jew, Gentile, and all the ends of the world. So something happened to Nephi. He doesn't tell us what, but he had an experience where he learned what the small plates were really for and who the audience was going to be. So there's two records now. One is the large plates and one is the small plates. And at this point in the story, they are both being written upon. All right. Now, what's on the small plates? Well, we know exactly what's on the small plates. It's everything that you read in 1 Nephi chapter 1 through the 1 Nephi or Omni. Now, Nephi tells us, and he tells us in 1 Nephi chapter 1 and also again in chapter 9, that his first assignment, or the first thing that he felt impressed to do, was to abridge his father's record. So the first 9 to 10 chapters of 1 Nephi is Nephi's abridgment of a much longer record of his father. And so he abridges the record of his father. To be honest, when I read 1 Nephi chapter 10, I can't tell if that's still his father's record or if it's Nephi's record, but certainly by the time we get to chapter 11, where Nephi is transported to the mountain and has his amazing vision of the tree of life and the whole history of the world. By the time that happens, Nephi's talking about his own record. But prior to that, he's abridging Lehi's record. So that's, I think, a significant fact. And finally, the small plates are not really a history. I mean, they tell a history in 1 Nephi, but everything after 2 Nephi chapter 4 is, he's speaking to us. And it's really a record that has a great focus on Christ and his ministry and on the covenants to the house of Israel and how they're going to be fulfilled. So that's the small plates. Now, very little was written after Jacob. So Nephi gave the small plates to Jacob. He gave the large plates to the kings. So we don't know very much about that king, but his name is 2 Nephi. That's what they called him. And it goes from generation to generation until there's a guy named Malachi who was a contemporary of King Benjamin. And Malachi says something that I think is very significant. In Omni chapter 1, verse 30, he says, these plates are full, which would explain why, the last several generations had written almost nothing because the plates were full. So I guess their option was to get some ore and add more plates and make the small plates a little bigger, or they could just write all the spiritual matters as well as historical matters onto the large plates, which is what they chose to do. And Malachi had no descendants, so Jacob's line had come to an end, and so he gave the small plates to King Benjamin. And at that point, custody of the large plates and the small plates were in the same hands for the rest of the Nephite history. Now, shortly after Amalekite, the Nephite civilization split into two different locations. The primary civilization was in Zarahemla, with people like Mosiah, Benjamin, and Mosiah, and then later Alma. And then over in the land of Nephi, you had Zeniff, wicked King Noah, and then Limhi. And you know the story. Because of wicked King Noah, the Nephites down in the land of Nephi got captured by the Lamanites, and they were treated pretty poorly. And Limhi was hoping to send an expedition to try to find the land of Zarahemla and ask for some military assistance. They did not find Zarahemla. They found a battleground filled with bones and cankered swords that were cankered with rust and breastplates, but they also found the 24 plates of ether. Of course, this was a Jaredite battleground, not a Nephite battleground. And they came back empty-handed when it comes to military assistance, but they brought those plates of ether to King Limhi. And shortly after that, King Mosiah said that he was wearied because of the teasings of those Nephites that were down there. In other words, he hadn't heard from them in 3 generations. So he sent his own set of explorers to find them, headed by a person named Ammon, not the Ammon who cut off the arms, but an Ammon who was a descendant of Zarahemla. And Ammon was successful in finding Limhi. Limhi says, do you know anybody who can translate? He said, oh yeah, we've got a prophet there who's got a Urim and Thummim. If we can ever get out of this place, King Limhi will translate it for us. And so when they get the Lamanites drunk, they sneak out. Ammon knows how to get back to Zarahemla. They get back there. Then now King Mosiah has got the small plates, the large plates, and the plates of ether. He translates the plates of ether with the gift of the Urim and Thummim, and gives at least a portion of it to the Nephites. And they were absolutely fascinated with that. Interestingly, Mormon, who is abridging the record at that point, sometime later, tells us that he's going to abridge the plates of ether. And we'll tell you more about that story in a little while. So in the story, how did we get the Book of Mormon? You know about the large plates, you know about the small plates, now you know about the plates of ether. So let's go to the rest of the history. The history moves on for several hundred years, and Jesus himself comes to minister to the Nephites, and he teaches them, he blesses their children. He restores the apostolic authority, and there's some things that he says that you simply cannot write, but there are some things, in fact, most of what he wrote, you could record. And the Book of Mormon says that the more part of Jesus's teachings were on the large plates. So the large plates contained virtually everything that Jesus taught, along with, again, lots of other things. So the Nephite history goes on for about 1,000 years. And again, all the key events, teachings, spiritual and secular import were on the large plates. So here's sort of an artist depiction of all these different prophets who were compiling a record on the large plates. Now, around 400 AD, maybe 380 AD, there was a boy prophet named Mormon. He's 10 years old. And Ammoron, who is the custodian of the records, comes to him and says, Mormon, I perceive that thou art a sober child and quick to observe. And when you're, around 23, 24, 25 years old, I want you to go to this hill. I want you to get the records. Now, there must have been something really special about Mormon, because not only did the prophet see greatness in him and call him when he was only 10 to be the custodian of the record, but he was made commander-in-chief of all the Nephite armies when he was only 15 years old. And Mormon's greatness to me is in part demonstrated not only by the quality of the Book of Mormon, but also by the fact that Mormon was a general who was on the front lines. There was all kinds of horrific events happening, human sacrifice, vile, things you don't say in civilized society, drinking the enemy's blood, torturing the women and children. He was a witness to all of that. And somehow he maintained a spirit so strong that he could give us what we now call the Book of Mormon. Now, here's the key point that I find very impressive, that Mormon received a commandment of the Lord to create a new book, a book that had not previously existed. I don't know how he got this commandment. I don't know if he had a vision of Jesus, or if an angel came to him, or if he just had a vision, or how he got this commandment, but it was very specific. And he says that he created a separate book, a separate set of plates. He said he created those plates with his own hands. Apparently he didn't have a plate shop where you could just go buy a set of blank plates. He said, I made this record with my own hands. And his assignment was to write a book for future generations, using everything that he had learned about the Nephite history. So I want you to think about, how would you feel if the Lord asked you to write a book for future generations? What if he came to you and said, listen, I want you to write a book. It's going to go on a hard drive, and it's going to sit in a vault until the year 3424 AD. And then they're going to pull it out of the vault, download it, and they will have a technology that will blow your mind. I don't know, they can time travel or clone humans or who knows, but they're going to be very, very different than you are. but they will have forgotten me. And your book is going to bring them back. Your book is going to be the primary means that I gather my covenant people. Your book is going to be the evidence of my work and my divine sonship, that I am the Christ. If I got that assignment, I would feel so overwhelmed. I mean, where do you start? I mean, do you start with Christopher Columbus? I mean, do you include the Revolutionary War? I mean, obviously, how much of the Restoration do you include? Do you quote from the Book of Mormon? Do you quote from conference reports? Do you quote from the Doctrine and Covenants? How about the Journal of Discourses? Or what do you include? I mean, what do you include from the military or the political situation that might be helpful to a group of people that are going to have a technology and a culture that's so far beyond anything you've ever imagined? I mean, we can put basically all the knowledge of the world that existed at that time on our cell phones. He's got to write a book that would be relevant and helpful and inspirational to this group. Nobody was going to read this book until 1,500 years later. That's the assignment that Mormon got. And so he created a set of plates and he went to work. And you know what he did? He decided it's all about the large plates. He decided that what I'm going to do is this is just what I was just telling you, that he made an abridgment. So he says, I'm going to abridge the large plates of Nephi, but I'm going to do it with an eye towards this future audience that I'm going to have. And he started that project and he got pretty far down the road. He got to King Mosiah the First, which is King Benjamin's father. And at that point, and when you read this in Words of Mormon, he stopped. Mormon says the Spirit told him to stop. You're leaving something out. And so he goes and searches amongst the records and he finds the small plates. And he acts like he's never read them before. He says, I found these small plates and they're just amazing. I mean, they're pleasing unto me. And he says, I put them with my record. He doesn't abridge them. He doesn't edit them. He doesn't change them. And it doesn't even say he recopied them. He said, I put the small plates with my plates of Mormon. And then he goes back to his original plan of abridging the large plates, which he does. He abridges all of the large plates. And so Mormon abridges everything that was on the large plates from Lehi's record, which we know from Nephi, the whole thing's on the large plates. And he finishes abridging the large plates. But in the middle, he put the small plates in with his record. Okay. He was going to abridge the plates of ether, but he got killed before he could do that project. Incidentally, Mormon didn't forget about the large plates. He continued to add to it. He says, I'm only going to give you just a little snippet of how horrible it was in this war where the Nephite civilization was being completely destroyed. And the scenes of horror and violence in front of my eyes are so grotesque. I'm not going to record most of it, but I'm going to give a full account on the large plates. So Mormon does write everything on the large plates. If we ever got those, then we would have a full account of what Mormon really went through. Okay. Now, did Mormon know why he was putting the small plates with his record? Apparently not. We've already covered that Nephi didn't fully understand, at least initially, why he was doing it. Mormon writes this, I'm going to put the small plates with my record for a wise purpose. For thus it whispereth me according to the workings of the Spirit of the Lord, which is in me. And now I don't know all things, but the Lord knoweth all things which are to come. Wherefore he's working in me to do according to his will. So think about the faith that it took Nephi to create the small plates and the faith that it took for Mormon to go back, search among the records, read a bunch of stuff, find the small plates and stick them with his record. But that's what happened. Now, let me give you just a small example of the kinds of activities that Mormon was going through. And I think we'll start with Jesus's ministry. We've already covered that the more part of what Jesus taught is on the large plates. But Mormon tells us that we only got 1% of what Jesus taught the people of Nephi. We really only have the first couple of days of Nephi's visit, a part of that. And then we've got a few snippets of Jesus coming in private to his disciples. But again, Mormon tells us that I'm only giving you 1% of what's actually on the large plates. And then he says this, he says 100th part of the things which Jesus truly did teach cannot be written in this book, meaning the plates of Mormon, the abridgment. He says, I was about to write all of them. I mean, think about it from Mormon's perspective. I mean, if you got to write a book for future generations, how could you ever go wrong with putting down the words of Jesus? I mean, just put them all down there. If it takes up the whole project, so be it. And that's what he was going to do. I was about to write all the words of Jesus, which were engraven on the large plates, but the Lord forbade it, saying, I will try the faith of my people. So I, Mormon, do write the things which has been commanded me of the Lord. So Mormon got specific guidance to leave 99% of Jesus's ministry out of his record. And so that's the kind of editorial decisions that Mormon was making, but he had help from the Lord when he was doing it. Now, before his death, Mormon buried the large plates and a lot of the other records that he had in his possession, but he gave his son Moroni the plates of Mormon, his abridgment. Obviously, he gave him the small plates, and he gave him the 24 golden plates of ether. And the rest of it, he says it was buried. That's in Mormon chapter 6. So Moroni picks up and finishes his father's life's work, which is this project of a book for future generations. Mormon knows exactly who he's writing to. So he finishes the last two chapters of Mormon, Mormons chapter 8 and 9. And then Moroni finishes his father's work of abridging the plates of ether. And he does that beautifully. And then he also adds 10 chapters of his own. Now, it's, I think, beautiful to see the humanity of Moroni as he's doing this project. He is aware of the magnitude of what he's been asked to do, and he feels very inadequate to the task. Most of you know that beautiful verse in Ether chapter 12, which says, I give unto men weakness that they may be humble. And I give unto, my grace is sufficient for them that humble themselves. Most of you can quote that verse. That verse is in the context of Moroni feeling inadequate about his role as the abridger and editor of the Book of Mormon. He says, man, he didn't say man, he says, thou hast made us that we could write but little because of the awkwardness of our hands. And when we write, we behold our weakness, we stumble, and I'm afraid the Gentiles are going to mock at what we write. And the Lord says, fools mock, but they shall mourn, and my grace is sufficient. Basically, don't worry. Joseph Smith will have a Urim and Thummim, and he'll write what you meant. So how was the Book of Mormon organized? We have the large plates, which were abridged by Mormon. We have the small plates, which were inserted into the record. And we have the plates of ether, which were abridged by Moroni. And that is what Joseph Smith took out of the hill, Cumorah. He took the Mormon's record, which was an abridgment of the large plates from Mormon, abridgment of the plates of ether from Moroni, some of Mormon and Moroni's own writings, and then the small plates completely unedited, unaltered. And that's what Joseph Smith got, okay? Moroni, of course, bears the record along with the small plates, the interpreters and so forth in a stone box. And that brings us to this point here. There is a difference between an engraver and a contributor. An engraver is somebody who has editorial power, somebody who can decide what is going in and not going into the book. A contributor might be someone like Alma or Abinadi or Jesus. But the engraver had to look at all these records and was the one that was deciding, of all these wonderful things I could give this future audience, what are they going to need? And so even if Mormon and Moroni had not contributed any of their own sermons or any of their own ideas, just their role as the editor, as the filter to decide what goes in and what doesn't go in, was extremely important. Now, I also include Nephi and Jacob as engravers because they're the primary engravers of the small plates. And again, those were not edited or altered. Now, did the Lord leave those engravers to their own devices, or did he give them help in deciding what they were going to include and not include? And the answer, of course, is they got help. The Lord prepared all four of these engravers so that they could do their job well in giving a future generation, and I mean more than 1,000 years later, a future audience, the book that they would need, the book that you and I would need. All four of them saw Jesus Christ, most of them when they were very young. Nephi was young. Mormon, I think, was 15. Jacob saw him. Moroni saw him. So that's the caliber of people that they have all seen Jesus Christ. All four of them were tutored by angels and supernatural beings like the three Nephites. All four of them received heavenly counsel of what to include. And I've told you about Mormon, what he talked about, that he got specific guidance on what to include when it comes to the words and writings of Jesus. But he wasn't the only one. All of them said that. Nephi, for example, when he was writing on the small plates and describing his amazing vision on the mountain, he sees the end of the world. He sees what we now call the book of Revelations. And he says, I was going to write it, but the Lord told me, don't write it. John, the Revelator, is going to do that. Of course, Moroni tells us repeatedly that the Lord gave him specific comments. And I have read the Book of Mormon with the explicit purpose of trying to see how often these engravers inject themselves and tell us, hey, the Lord gave me guidance on what to write and what not to write. And it's dozens and dozens of times they mention that the Lord guided me when I was deciding what to include and not to include. Significantly, all of them had a vision of our day. By the time that they wrote, they knew that they were writing to us. Moroni says it this way. He says, I speak unto you as if you're present, but you're not. For Jesus Christ has shown me unto you, and I know you're doing. I can see you. Why is there so much on war in the Book of Mormon? Why is there so much on pride? Why is there so much on money? Why is there so much on sexual immorality? It's because they saw us. They knew. I mean, can you imagine how wonderful those first 200 years after Jesus's ministry was for the Nephites? We get one page. One page. Why? Because they saw what we would need. And apparently the bliss of Zion society is not what we need. They saw our day, they gave us what we would need. They also all said, I can only write a small portion. Most of them said, I can only write 100th part. Nephi said, I can only write 100th part. Mormon and Moroni both said, I can only write 100th part. And that, to me, is very significant in terms of how much I appreciate the Book of Mormon. And finally, all four of them say, at Judgment Day, I'm going to be there to account for what I wrote, and you're going to be there, to meet me. Let me read just the last few verses of 2nd Nephi. He says, if these are not the words of Christ, judge you, for Christ will show you with power and great authority at the last day that these are his words. And you and I shall stand face to face before his bar. And you will know that I've been commanded of him to write these things, notwithstanding my weakness. And you that will not partake of the goodness of God and respect the words of the Jews and also my words and the words which shall proceed forth out of the mouth of the Lamb of God, behold, I bid you an everlasting farewell, for these words shall condemn you at the last day. So Mormon says it, Moroni says it, at Judgment Day, I've got to be there to account for what I wrote, and you got to be there to account for whether you read it and followed it. Obviously, that seems pretty significant to me, and it gives me a greater appreciation for what we have here. So that's how we got the Book of Mormon up until the time it went into the Hill Cumorah. So, there are a number of key implications to the story I just told you. The first one is there's no other book in the world written like this. I challenge anyone to tell me a book that was written with the idea that nobody would read it for 1,400 years. And it was written by prophets who were given a vision of what the future audience would need. So yes, the book of Corinthians in the New Testament is beautiful. It's filled with timeless truths. It was written to the Corinthians, but it has principles of general application that apply even 2,000 years later. But the Book of Mormon was not written for the Nephites. It was written for us. And it was written by prophets who were specifically prepared to do such a magnificent work. Yes, it was written for our day. We would do well, I think, to pay attention to it. Now, once you understand the framework of who the engravers are, the book just comes alive for you. At least it does for me. One of the things is you'll see, and thus we see passages in it. And that's, the engravers saying, hey, in case you missed it, here's the take-home message. Like, and thus we see the devil will not support his children. That's what Mormon injects himself into the record when he's talking about Korihor, when he gets run over by the chariots. Or you can see, and thus we see how unstable and foolish the children of men are. Or, and thus we see how wonderful the Lord is. And so you'll see, and thus we see passages throughout, and you'll understand those are the engravers that are trying to make sure that we don't miss the take-home message. Once you understand that they only could write 1%, or as Jacob put it, I can only write the heads of, the topics. We know that we're getting the meat and potatoes. We're getting, exactly what we need and nothing more. And so anytime you're reading the Book of Mormon and you feel like, yeah, I got this, or why is this even in here? think, whoa, whoa, whoa. Mormon and Moroni had to leave 99 stories out to put this one in. What is it about this story or this doctrine or this scripture that is so important that it made the cut when 99 other stories like it got left out? And when you read it that way, you'll find that the principles and the doctrines and concepts and doctrine will just come alive for you. And so I just wrote what the Book of Mormon says about the Book of Mormon. As I mentioned, I've got a project going where I'm trying to figure out what does the Book of Mormon say about itself. And there's just a lot there. And so as you understand who the engravers are, who's got, if you will, the keyboard is how we'd say it today, to control what's in and what's out, it makes the book easier to understand and easier to read. It also gives, to me, a great feeling that the Lord cared an awful lot about the Book of Mormon, a lot. And that is both inspiring to me and impressive to me. It means that, this is something I should pay attention to. And I'm also impressed with the faith and the work that it took to get this for us. What Nephi went through, what all the people who made the large plates went through, certainly what Mormon and Moroni went through. Moroni, after all, was on the run for over 20 years after his father was killed. When he's trying to abridge, he actually has to go back and get some more ore, and because he doesn't have room at first, and he goes and adds more ore to the plates, and then he does it. How does he even do that? We don't know, but I am grateful for these prophets, and one day I will meet them, apparently at the judgment bar. And when I do, I want to throw my arms around them and thank them, because this book has changed my life. Okay, now the story doesn't end there, because Joseph Smith's got to get it, and that's an amazing story too. So we've got 20 minutes. Let's see what we can get done. You know that when Joseph was 11 years old, he moved to Palmyra. This is a picture of the log home that they were in. The whole Smith family was in this little bitty house. This is the Hill Cumorah, which is a few miles away. And the Smith family was really kind of driven to Palmyra. And that's a lesson for another day. But, they were originally started in Sharon, Vermont, and then they went to Massachusetts, and then they had this volcano, and, and it got so cold, they called it 1800 and froze to death. And anyway, they end up day laborers in Palmyra, but the Lord got them to where they needed to be, because Joseph Smith had his first vision in 1820. And it's a beautiful story. I know that it's true, but it's a lesson for another day. 3 years later, Joseph Smith has a vision of the angel Moroni, and it's the first time he meets Moroni. So it's been 3 years since his first vision. Joseph Smith is basically saying, look, it's been 3 years. I've kind of just been acting like a normal teenager. And I need forgiveness of my sins. And, is the ball in your court or mine, or what's next? And Moroni appears to him and tells him that there's a work for him to do. And there's a book that Moroni had deposited there in the hill 1400 years earlier. As you know, this vision happened 3 times throughout the night, and then one more time as he crossed the fence. And there was a lot more than just the book. There's Malachi, and who knows what else they talked about. We know they talked about a lot. We just don't have it. Then every year, Joseph went to the Hill Cumorah and met with Moroni. I wish I could have been a bird sitting on the tree listening to those discussions, because Moroni tutored and molded Joseph Smith during those interviews over the next 4 years. And finally, Joseph gets the plates. Now, there's a lot to tell here, but I've skipped it. But there was a lot of effort on the part of the townspeople to get those plates. Whatever skeptics there were, they believed that Joseph had the plates, and they were trying hard to get them. And it was dangerous for Joseph and his family. And so Martin Harris, who's a merchant or a gentleman farmer in Palmyra area, gives him $50, which is quite a bit of money back then, so that he can move to where Emma's family is from, in Harmony, Pennsylvania. So they do. They move from Palmyra, and here's Palmyra, and Harmony, Pennsylvania is right across the Pennsylvania border here. And this is a picture of the house that Joseph and Emma moved into. Emma came from a fairly well-to-do family. The Hales lived in a nice, stately country house near this property, on the same property. And this is where they moved into. And this is where the translation of the Book of Mormon really took off. Emma, at first, was hopeful in this regard. And so she had some impressions, and it might be interesting for you to hear some of the things that she said about this process. She wasn't the primary scribe, but she did do enough of it to see what was happening. She says that when my husband was translating the Book of Mormon, I wrote part of it, and as he dictated each sentence, word for word. And when he came to proper names he couldn't pronounce, or long words, he'd just spell them out, and then she would write them. She says that when acting as his scribe, your father would dictate to me hour after hour. And when returning after meals or after interruptions, he'd just pick back up where he left off without ever seeing the manuscript or having any portion of it read to him. Think about that. If he just innocents with a sentence, takes a few hours off to do some chores outside or to get a meal or to take a break, he comes back, just picks up with the next word as if, you know, he were reading something, but he didn't have it read back to him. That's her description of what happened. She says that one time he was translating and he stopped. This would have been when they were in Fayette doing the small plates. Talk about that. And he stopped suddenly, pale as a sheet, and said, Emma, did Jerusalem have walls? I said, yes. He said, oh, I was afraid I'd been deceived. He had such a limited knowledge of the history at the time that he didn't even know that Jerusalem was surrounded by walls. And, you know, obviously that's significant when you look at the beauty and the complexity of the Book of Mormon, that, you know, a guy with a third grade education could do this. She says, Joseph Smith could neither write nor dictate a coherent, well-worded letter, let alone dictate a book like the Book of Mormon. And though I was actively participant in the scenes that transpired, it's marvelous to me. I mean, it's a marvel and a wonder, as much to me as anyone else, how this happened. So that's Emma's description as she served as scribe here in Harmony, Pennsylvania, and then later in Fayette. Martin Harris, who lived 150 miles away back in the Palmyra area, Palmyra and Manchester are like right across the path. I mean, it's Provo and Orem if you're just at a tiny little town. So it's basically the same place. Anyway, and Martin makes the 150-mile trip to Harmony, and he wants to help. He's already given him $50 to go there, but his wife is concerned and he's being duped, you know, and you know, you can judge her, but I can understand at least her questions. And so he wants to make sure that he's not being duped. And so Joseph takes some characters from the golden plates, and he doesn't give him a copy of the translation manuscript. He gives him actual copies of the characters, the Reformed Egyptian characters. And Martin takes them to a Dr. Charles Anthon, who's supposed to be an expert in ancient languages. Now, the two gentlemen have a different story about what happened. Martin Harris says that Dr. Anthon agreed that it was authentic. And then once he found out that they were from golden plates and angels, he tore up the certificate that he had written and said, I don't want anything to do with it. Mr. Anthon says, no, I told him it was a fraud from the very beginning. So there's a discrepancy between the two about what happened there. But what we do know is that when Martin got back, he was satisfied because he left his place in Palmyra area and came and stayed in Harmony, Pennsylvania, and served as Joseph's scribe. And this goes on until 116 pages are transcribed. And this is what he says about it. He says that Joseph sometimes used the Urim and Thummim and sometimes used a seer stone. And he said sentences would appear and were read by the prophet and written by Martin. And whenever Martin had finished writing it, he would say written, and then Joseph would keep going on to the next sentence. Of course, you know that Martin Harris wanted his wife to be at peace. He says, if she'll just read the 116 pages we've already translated, she'll feel the Spirit the way I do. I'm sure she'll be okay with it. Let me take them. The Lord said no. The Lord said no again. Finally, he says yes, and Martin loses the 116 pages. Joseph thinks he's lost his soul. He gets the plates taken from him. The angel Moroni takes the interpreters and the plates away. But eventually they come back. He gets the record again. By the way, Martin didn't come back to tell him. Joseph had to go to Manchester to find out that the manuscript had been lost. And so once he gets the plates, meaning Joseph gets the plates, it's around March of 1829, he starts to translate again. The Doctrine and Covenants says, translate just a few pages and then I'll give you some help. The problem, of course, is that Joseph doesn't have a scribe. And sure enough, Oliver Cowdery shows up on April the 5th. And they start translating on April the 7th. And that was such an amazing thing. Sometimes he would use the Urim and Thummim. We don't have the Urim and Thummim anymore. Of course, the angel Moroni took that back. But we still have the seer stone. The seer stone is just a stone that Joseph found when he was a day laborer as a young man. And he felt like it helped him get in touch with his gifts, his spiritual gifts. And so he gave it to Brigham Young. It's still at the church headquarters. And if you go to the church museum, you can see the seer stone. So both were used in the translation process. Now, there was persecution in Harmony, Pennsylvania, including from Emma's parents, who thought that Joseph was not doing enough to support the family And and he wasn't paying his mortgage. And so they wanted him to leave. And Joseph ends up moving to Fayette. So here's Harmony, Pennsylvania. Fayette, New York is up here. So they moved to Fayette and they finished the translation up there. That's also the little house where the church was organized in Fayette, New York, sacred place. This is what David Whitmer. David Whitmer, of course, was one of the witnesses to the golden plates. He also was, for just a few pages, a scribe on the translation. And he said that one time Joseph was put out because he and Emma had a little spat, and he could not translate a single syllable. And he had to go outside and supplicate the Lord, ask Emma for forgiveness, and then the translation went all right. I think that's a very significant statement about how much he had to have the Spirit with him. Oliver was with Joseph in Harmony, Pennsylvania, and in Fayette, New York. And this is how he described the translation process. He says, Sidney didn't write it. Solomon Spaulding didn't write it. I wrote it myself as it fell from the lips of the prophet. He says at the beginning of this quote, I wrote with my own pen the entire Book of Mormon, save a few pages as it fell from the lips of the prophet Joseph Smith. He did it with the seer stone and with the Urim and Thummim. He says just before he died in 1912, I'm a dying man. What would it profit me to tell you a lie? This was no dream. It was no vain imagination of mine. It was real. So what does the historical record tell us about how long the translation took? I think this is very significant because it just fell off the lips of the prophet Joseph. And there are some anchor dates, is what my old law professor called it, Jack Welch, where you can look at the historical record and verify the date when something happened, but it can also serve as an anchor, if you will, as to where Joseph and Oliver were in the translation process. For example, we know that they started translating on April the 7th, okay? And we know that because both Joseph and Oliver's record tell us that they met on the 5th. Joseph says, I had some temporal business to take care of on the 6th, and on the 7th, they started translating. Well, we now found in a Pennsylvania courthouse about 5-6 miles away what that temporal business was. And it was that Joseph was buying that little house I showed you, the house that was a guest house of Emma's parents. And they needed a witness. So Oliver came down, and his name is actually on the deed, and the date of the deed is April 6th. They met on April 5th. Oliver was a witness to him purchasing the house on April 6th. They started translating on April the 7th. There are a number of historical documents that tell us that almost nothing was translated before April 7th. Well, we had the 116 pages that were lost, but I'm talking about what we have and what we know as the Book of Mormon. Obviously, you have Oliver that says, I wrote the whole thing. That didn't start until April 7th. David Whitmer said, I wrote a few pages, but I have examined the original manuscript, and it's all in Oliver's handwriting except for a few pages. Doctrine and Covenants section 5 says, translate just a few more plates or a few more pages, and then stop for a season, and I'll get you some help. And Emma and Lucy Macksmith both say that until Oliver got here, nothing, the translation of the Book of Mormon didn't really get off the ground. Okay, so that's anchor date number 1, is that on April 7th, that's when the translation started. Okay, number 2 is the restoration of the Aaronic priesthood. That happened on May 15th, 1829. What was that, about 5 weeks after the translation starts? The restoration of the Aaronic priesthood happened because 3 Nephi chapter 11 was translated. And in 3 Nephi chapter 11, Jesus tells the disciples that here's the prayer that you give when you baptize somebody, having authority. I baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, and so forth. And so Joseph and Oliver said, well, nobody has authority to baptize. And so they went out near the banks of the Susquehanna River, which is right next to the Emma's house in Harmony, Pennsylvania. And that's when John the Baptist comes and restores the Aaronic priesthood. Oliver Cowdery's journal says, after writing the account given of the Savior's ministry, we got the question about who has authority to baptize. So we know that they were already through translating Jesus's ministry by May the 15th. Well, the thing started April 7th. Just get your mind around that if you even can. Okay. Anchor date number 3, we know that the title page was translated by May 31st. They moved to Fayette on June 1st. And so, we know that the title page was the very last page in the book. And so, meaning Joseph Smith had translated all of Mormon's abridgment of the large plates, all of Moroni's abridgment of the plates of ether, and the 10 chapters in Moroni, and then the title page. And he did all that on or before May 31st. Okay. And then finally, on June the 11th, which is what, 11 days after the title page was translated, the copyright application was filed. And we found the copyright actual copy of it in the Library of Congress, and it includes the whole text of the title page, which I've already said was done at the very last page of the Plates of Mormon. So the only thing left was the small plates. And finally, we know that the translation was truly complete by June the 30th. How do we know that? Well, because Joseph and Hiram moved back to the Palmyra area, Palmyra, Manchester, to talk to printers on July the 1st. Joseph didn't even have a copy of the original manuscript at that point. At that point, Oliver started making the printer's manuscript. So the whole thing went from April the 7th to June the 30th. Now, in addition to translating the entire Book of Mormon, there's a lot of other stuff that happened during this time period. Okay? Doctrine and Covenants 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 were received. Joseph and Oliver go to Colesville, which is 27 miles away. The Aaronic priesthood is restored. They go to Colesville again. They baptize Samuel Smith, get Doctrine and Covenants 11 and 12. Then they move to Harmony, Pennsylvania on June 1st. That's a 100-mile trip. I don't know how long it took them to pack up and get there and unpack and get going. And, but I mean, that took some time. Then they had to figure out how to do a copyright application and fill out the application and get that filed. They got Doctrine and Covenants 14, 15, 16, and 18 during this time period. Then they've got the 3 witnesses. You got the 8 witnesses on different days. You've got more baptisms, and the translation is finished. To be honest, just this list right here is enough to staggering amount of spiritual things happening, but you somehow cram in the entire Book of Mormon translation during this time. It's really incredible. So, by the way, I'll be quick here. The original manuscript was put in the cornerstone of this building, which is the Nauvoo House, and it stayed there until 1882, and by then only about 28% of it remains. The water got the rest of it. But we have that now, and we can see whose handwriting it's in and so forth. The printer's manuscript, the church finally got in 2017 for $35 million. The church wanted to make sure that everybody knows that it was done by private donors, but so we have both. And we were able to learn a lot from them. Maybe it's a lesson for another time, but there's an awful lot of powerful lessons just from what we have from the original manuscript. One thing we know for sure is that it really was, there's no evidence of editing, no evidence of significant changes, no evidence of collaboration, and it's just about all in Oliver's handwriting, except for the stuff that was done in Fayette, which is the small plates. So how come the Book of Mormon wasn't messed up? Why doesn't it start with Mosiah chapter 1? Because Nephi created the small plates, even though he wasn't sure why he was doing it, and Mormon was inspired to go get the small plates and put them with his record. And so you have the abridgment of the large plates that Mormon did, along with Moroni's work. All that was translated by Joseph Smith in Harmony, Pennsylvania. And then you have the small plates, which was translated once they got to Fayette. And that small plates just fit right nicely into the first part of the Book of Mormon. And so we start with I Nephi, which is the beginning words of the small plates. How do we know that the small plates were translated in Fayette? Well, we know that the original manuscript has some of the writing of the Whitmers, and the Whitmers didn't happen until Fayette. We also know that the renewed interest in the 3 witnesses and the 8 witnesses came after they translated 2 Nephi 27. It's in a footnote in the church history. And of course, 2 Nephi 27, verse 12, talks about the 3 witnesses and the 8 witnesses. May 15th, that revelation and that the restoration of the Aaronic priesthood, that happened in Harmony. But the 3 and the 8 witnesses happened in Fayette in response to a translation of the small plates. So the first part of the Book of Mormon was translated last, but it was placed in there because it fits perfectly in terms of chronological order. So how long did it take to translate the Book of Mormon? 8 pages a day. Why is that significant? Well, it's incredible. I mean, the implications are staggering. That means that Joseph Smith translated the Psalm of Nephi in less than 2 hours. That means that all of King Benjamin's speech, the first 5 chapters of Mosiah, would have been translated in less than 2 days. I couldn't write King Benjamin's speech if you gave me 2 lifetimes. I couldn't write a Psalm of Nephi no matter how much time you gave me. And to think that a guy with a 3rd grade education, it just fell off his lips, rapid space, it's incredible. The other thing that we know from the historical account of how we got the Book of Mormon, particularly when you think about what the manuscript shows us, there's no time to collaborate. There's no time to edit. There's no time to correct. There's no time to conduct any research. I mean, the whole thing just fell off his lips at the rate of 8 pages a day. Once you really get your mind around the complexity and the beauty of the Book of Mormon, the poetry that's in the Book of Mormon, the doctrine, the complex internal consistency in the Book of Mormon, and the fact that the first part was translated last, and yet it still is consistent in terms of the promises made, and then the fulfillment of the promises, and then one prophet quoting another prophet. But Joseph had to remember that when he translated the small plates to do that. You're in the realm of the supernatural. Nobody. Royal Skousen put it this way: the question is not whether Joseph Smith could have done something like that, it's whether any human being or even group of human beings could do that. But the idea that you could take the Book of Mormon and just dictate it without revision, without research, without collaboration at the rate of 8 pages a day, that is one of the most underreported miracles in the history of the church. Oliver Cowdery said this: these were days never to be forgotten. To sit under the sound of a voice dictated by the inspiration of heaven awakened the utmost gratitude of this bosom. Day after day, I continued uninterrupted to write from his mouth as he translated, with the Urim and Thummim, or as the Nephites would have said, interpreters, the history or record called the Book of Mormon. I know that we've gotten a lot of information out in the last hour. I promise over the next 11 sessions that we have this year, we will get into the message in the Book of Mormon. We'll go over in detail the scriptures. But I have been changed by the Book of Mormon. I am forever grateful that Nephi, Jacob, Mormon, and Moroni compiled a book for me and you, for people in our day. I'm grateful that the Lord inspired them to do what they did, to include what they included, to create a second record, to go through the painstaking work of engraving on metal plates. I will never, never be able to plumb all of the depths of the Book of Mormon. And I want you to know that I know that it's true. I am not just convinced, I know that it's true. I can't give that knowledge to anybody. We could just point and say, this is where we found it. But I want you to know that if you make a serious study of it, that you will be uplifted, you will be edified, you'll gain a testimony of the restoration, you'll gain a testimony of Jesus Christ, you'll gain an understanding of his atonement and learn how to access the power of the atonement of Christ. You'll also be edified by the pure beauty of this amazing piece of literature. You'll be filled with a desire to be a better person. It just fills you with a capacity and a desire to keep the commitments you've made and to repent every day. It also is a fountain of personal revelation. It is the gift that keeps on giving. And there's nothing like it in the world. And the Lord gave us this book. Prophets have always dreamed of having something like this, and we have it ourselves. And I am grateful for it. I'm inspired by how it came forth. And I want you to know that I love you, I love the Lord, I love the Book of Mormon, and I hope that all of us can come to feel of its power with this year together with greater depth, greater clarity, greater understanding, and a greater measure of the Holy Spirit upon us. And I leave that thought with you in my love for you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. So,